Hello, good morning, and welcome to From Incentives to Infrastructure, how state policy and the development of SAF hubs are shaping the North America SAF market, where our panel will be discussing the impact of state incentives and the benefits of emerging SAF hubs for everyone across the value chain. My name's Roz. I'm the content director for the SAF North America Congress. Sustainable Aviation Futures hosts a global series of high-level SAF and aviation decarbonisation conferences, bringing together the entire value chain to network, connect, and discuss the capabilities for scaling innovative energy solutions and powering a thriving aviation industry. Over the next 60 minutes, our panel of experts will explore how state-level incentives are shaping SAF project development, investment decisions, and regional competitiveness, the role of SAF hubs in connecting feedstocks, production, infrastructure, airports, and demand, what makes a state attractive for SAF producers, airlines, financiers, and technology partners, and more. The webinar is being hosted ahead of the SAF North America Congress, which is taking place in Houston from November 4th to 6th. Today, we'll provide a snapshot of some of the topics covered at the event, which will also include all of our speakers today, and is supported by companies representing the entire SAF value chain. The three-day event features over 800 senior leaders and industry experts from across the entire aviation and energy value chain to discuss announced SAF projects and exciting offtake agreements in North America, the path to meeting the industry's ambitious targets, as well as the global SAF landscape and other innovative energy technologies. If you'd like to join us at the event, you can reach out to me or my colleagues on screen now. We're offering a 10% discount to all of the webinar attendees, which will give you the best value if you want to book. Our early bird pricing and the discount will expire, so don't wait. Reach out soon. Also, if you'd like to keep abreast of all of our upcoming events, as well as gain access to exclusive interviews and articles, be sure to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, SAF Spotlight, which you can access on www.sustainableaviationfutures.com. Finally, before I hand over to today's moderator, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. The session is being recorded and will be distributed to you once the webinar finishes. So if you have to go, you won't miss out, although you might miss out on the opportunity to do Q&A. To that end, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, so please ask any questions that you have in there rather than the chat box, and we will do our best to answer them all. With that, I'm pleased to hand over to today's brilliant moderator, Sean Newsome, the Managing Director of Environmental Affairs at Airlines for America. Sean, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Roz. Glad to be here today with the Sustainable Aviation Futures people. We're going to talk about, as Roz said, state policies, state SAF hubs, and how they're helping to accelerate the SAF market. The North American SAF market has been growing steadily for the last several years, with the investment and production capacity build out accelerated by significant new supply side and demand side policies that were put in place in US, Canada, and Europe at the beginning of this decade. Last year in the US, SAF availability based on EPA RIN generation reached 289 million gallons, most of that domestic production. And production capacity in the US now sits at around 1,415 million gallons, with some production expansion projects underway in the country. From the demand side, the US market for SAF is a voluntary market, and demand is driven by the stack of federal state incentives in combination with the cost premiums paid by airlines and corporate buyers. State policy incentives are playing a significant role in lowering this cost premium, making SAF more affordable for airlines and increasing demand and offtake as a result. Regional SAF hubs played a significant and effective role in organizing and aligning stakeholders to advocate for state policy incentives and local supply chain investment to enable SAF production and use in their respective regions. Our panelists here are involved in all of those activities in their respective regions, some of them more than one. And so I'd like to introduce each of them and then have them give some introductory remarks about how state-level incentives are shaping SAF project development, investment decisions, and regional competitiveness. First, we have Amir Shams, Manager Energy Strategy, Low Carbon Fuels for SAF at RMI. Amir?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amir, and I work for a think tank called the Rocky Mountain Institute. We have been around for about 40 years, but in the aviation space, we have worked with the World Energy Forum's Clean Skies for Tomorrow and led demand side work for them. And we also run Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance along with EDF and have been looking at the corporate voluntary side of the market for a very long time. Looking forward to joining you all on this webinar.
Next, we have Stephanie Mine, Climate Program Manager at SEA Airport.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Mine. And in my role as the Climate Program Manager at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, I've been sort of playing in this space for about 12 years and really looking at how an airport's role can best support SAF uptake. We understand that, of course, airports in the US typically are not purchasers of those fuels. So what can we do to accelerate the market? So we've been involved in studies with RMI, some of the other panelists here on different policies, different market mechanisms, and most importantly, that you'll hear about a little later, working on the infrastructure integration and how we can get SAF into our airport and airports in general in the most cost-effective manner. So I look forward to our discussion.
Next, we have Graham Noyes, Managing Attorney at Noyes Law Corporation.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here today and appreciate all the work with Sustainable Aviation Futures. I'm an attorney based in California, do a lot of work on state policy, particularly as to SAF. Have been working in this space for, I guess, over 12 years now, particularly bringing alternative jet fuel into the different clean fuel standards out there. Currently working on the California diesel SAF/SAS tax credit. We'll talk about some today, and really glad to discuss these issues given the vital importance of state incentives as a sort of decision maker in where the SAF is moving first.
And last but not least, we have Bruce Marsh, Senior Director from the DHL Group.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and thanks to the team for the invitation. Work out of our corporate public affairs office, based here in Washington, D.C., but support our efforts across the North American region and working primarily, federal credits, state incentives, and in particular, we'll talk today a lot about our efforts in Kentucky, where we successfully got an incentive through earlier this year in the state legislature. But as a company, we are very focused. We're up to 10% now. I've been chipping away in terms of our total SAF use, 10% of our total fuel use in 2025, and through offtake agreements, through the use of leveraging incentives with our offtake partners, we've been pretty successful at making it happen. So great to be here, and look forward to sharing some of our insights.
Thanks, Bruce. So if I can just do a quick follow-up question for you, since you just finished, can you talk a little bit about how the state level incentives, have been important to DHL and what it does in the United States?
Yeah, so we've been razor focused. We have a really progressive procurement team who has been working with our partners for a number of years, and I think the incentive is part of the formula, but a really important part of the formula. And I think we have been successful really by pushing and leveraging. California, of course, was the first one for us, and we're up to 6 airports now in the U.S., adding 2 more by the end of the year. And I think looking at those, I think 4 of the 8 have some kind of incentive in place. And so I think I saw a quote somewhere that says the best incentive doesn't replace private capital, but it attracts it. And I think that's really key here, and a really an important kind of motto to live by. And I think we have a lot of things go into how we decide or how incentives are determined. And I think in the case of Kentucky, it was really it's the political and economic climate that we have there. There are a lot of factors: the tax and budgetary situation, producer versus consumer credits. We went for a producer side credit that we can ultimately benefit from, and really trying to limit in a state like Kentucky the complexities of the credit. And I think those were all kind of factors that went into it. And we'll be happy to talk about it more, but those are a few kind of introductory thoughts.
And Graham, you represent a number of SAF producers on the development side, and operational as well. Can you talk about how the state credits affect their investment decisions? You're on mute, buddy.
Certainly, Sean. Very much in line with your comments and Bruce's comments. It is very much a stacking situation, and we have sort of at the bottom of the policy stack the federal incentives, which of course are different depending on the nature of the fuel and the origin of the fuel and feedstocks out there. So there's a variable there, and then the state programs potentially are either nothing, so to speak, out there, or you might have a clean fuel standard. Those we'll talk about have some variable provisions in them, so they may or may not be more favorable to your fuel. Those have some different market values, so they're more or less favorable there also. And then you have the tax credit provision, and the devil is always in the details in the tax credit provision too, depending on what kind of tax credit it is and how it fits in. And then the overlay is on the facilities kind of costs and location and logistics. So all of those pieces go into that equation Bruce was talking about to see essentially where the best deal is that fits for the off-taker.
Thanks, Bruce. And as you know, I noted at the open and is in the sort of the summary of this webinar, the regional SAF hubs are playing an increasing role in helping bring these state policies into place. So Amir, I know you've been involved in looking at various regional hubs. Can you talk about what you see going on in the hubs and how they're affecting the policies and the producer activity?
Absolutely. I think to start off, I would like to say that 45Z and the RFS equalize the playing field in all of America. The only thing that will start making a difference is the state level incentives. So that's really important when you come at it from a state perspective, SAF is something that's new. And, there are a lot of states vying to become the next leader in this new fuel category. So it's important to note that there are a lot of non-environmental benefits attached to the production of SAF that the states are also looking at. So that's like local economy, the job creation space, the education and the training pipeline. So these are all the things that, a lot of people don't really focus on. But when you talk to the states, I think these are at the top of their list. When it comes to the corporate side, every single dollar that stacks on the incentive graph shaves off about $100 per ton of CO2 abated price, right? So as a rule of thumb, I'm like $1 is equal to almost $100 per ton of CO2 abated. So that just helps the corporate make the right move in terms of getting the SAFC.
Samir. And then Stephanie, you're SCA airport, largest airport in the Pacific Northwest. Can you talk a little bit about the hub activities going on in that part of the world?
Sure. Yeah, so we have a pretty strong history in the Pacific Northwest with research that was done early on in, I believe, 2011, to look at just what our region's strength is and would be in the SAF ecosystem. And luckily, or fortunate for us, our legislature was very interested in the work and mandated that we, as a collaborative, and that included our airport as well as airplane manufacturers, airlines in our region, to develop recommendations to the Washington State Legislature every 2 years. And those reports have been incredibly powerful for getting a cohesive ecosystem voice to say, these are the types of incentives that would really matter for us in the state of Washington. And building on that, in the last 2 years, the Cascadia SAF Accelerator has become our hub that has basically looked at different features of the ecosystem that includes policy as well as infrastructure, feedstocks, all of the sorts of parts of the value chain, and has been able to leverage from a policy perspective what's happening there, where we've done some foundational research, and is really now bringing that into a collective vision for the region. And that's what we've been missing. And it's been also really helpful. One of the first things we're going to be doing this year as part of a conference is inviting other SAF hubs in to discuss what they've learned, what their experience is, where they've had the biggest challenges. And so some people might see the hubs as being competitive, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration, and we're really excited to do that this fall.
And can you, you mentioned Cascadia, there's also the Washington State Alternative Jet Fuel Working Group that's been in place for several years. Can you talk about how that working group has helped influence and motivate policy development in Washington State?
Yes. And Graham knows all about this as well, is because the first few years, well, almost the first decade of that group's work was to continually recommend a clean fuel standard. So that was a lot of the work initially, because that is when we're talking about the stacked policies after the federal one, a clean fuel standard, and California really set the bar for that, is the next stack. And then you look at the other tax credits and other things that are maybe more unique to your state and how its tax structure is developed or is structured. And so that working group, after the pass of the clean fuel standard, because we were so united in that one singular thing, it was interesting to see the transition when we started looking at these other kind of tax credits and benefits. And really, it's with that group, we were able to pass the SAF bill, known as SB 5447, and that is really a producer tax credit. And what we also did was, in addition to recommending the different structures and different incentives that we wanted to recommend to the legislature, we also put degrees of consensus and the degree of importance in those reports, so the legislature could also know, hey, this is where this group, from producers to users to airlines, everyone's united on this policy and is the most important one that we're elevating. But here are other things to consider that we also are looking at and may have different levels of support, but are valuable for the legislature to know about. So it's been incredible that since the passing of the Clean Fuel Standard, we've been able to take the most elevated number one recommendation and turn that into a bill.
Right, and I just wanted to kind of amplify Stephanie on her points. I actually was living up in Seattle at the time when that Sustainable Aviation Fuels Northwest group was put together, and I think it was around 2011. I think it was SeaTac at the time that was very involved then. It was, I think, maybe Sean, you were at Boeing at the time or thereabouts, and Alaska Airlines, and then Climate Solutions were there. So that got everybody really thinking really early in Washington State and the Northwest about state policy. It was very early stage. Some of the things that were hoped for didn't happen in that report. But I think it was really best practices to establish that state legislative report, and that has been the genesis for a lot of the really good ideas for Washington. And obviously, Washington's always been an aviation leader, and they're very competitive. And frankly, I'd share that I think they're probably outcompeting California on that front right now in terms of having the right state policy. So, Amir might have some ideas. I know they've done a lot of work with regional issues out there and thinking about the interplay. But just wanted to really emphasize that.
And Sean, maybe I could go next. Just to say, I think that Stephanie's points particularly on the feasibility study, really important to kind of bring all of the parts together. I think we don't have technically hub in our name in Kentucky, but we do have a really incredible group of partners and allies, and I think it really gelled this year. partly because of the macroeconomic situation for farmers in this country and in Kentucky in particular, where you've got lots of corn and soy and nowhere for it to go. And I think they saw an opportunity, and so we brought together a coalition that was already, we had some very us and our peers. Some big aviation players like GE, who has their headquarters, GE Aviation, academia, but we also brought in the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce and the Kentucky Farm Bureau, and that really made the difference to bring in those people and really make this a statewide effort. So far, when we got started in 2020, it was mainly just major employers, mainly in the aviation industry and the major airports. But by bringing it, widening that net and bringing in, particularly with the chamber and the farmers, it really was effective in terms of getting more legislators interested in trying to get incentive through. So that was key with that feasibility study. And I mean, I think all the parts that you mentioned, I think having that public policy stability as well. I mean, we have Kentucky, which is a very Republican state. 80%, I think, of the legislature is Republican, but you have a Democratic governor, and we had stability in the sense that you had both parties interested in this, and so I think that was helpful to us. And we had very active agricultural commissioners, economic development, and the governor, all of them playing a role as well to try to help get the incentive through over the finish line this year.
And I've been aware of the Kentucky effort for a while, and I think it's important to note that it was a multi-year effort in Kentucky, steady effort from the Cincinnati airport, which is a cargo hub airport for the country, and the tenants there, DHL playing a primary leadership role. So I think it was probably surprising to a lot of people to see that SAF tax credit come out of Kentucky. But it didn't happen overnight. I think that's sort of a theme here. Stephanie mentioned Washington State starting way back in 2011, very long burn, if you will. Not quite that long in Kentucky, but still multi-year effort, right? So then not directly represented here, but I kind of want to give a shout out to some of the other hubs that exist in the country. So the Minnesota SAF hub has been extremely active and has been effective in getting a SAF tax credit in place in Minnesota. They just last week had the ribbon cutting of a SAF blending facility to support MSP. That's a unique feature that's come out of a SAF hub so far. So kudos to people in Minnesota. And Massachusetts similarly has a Massport organized SAF hub that has been successful in getting a SAF tax credit in place through, as Stephanie, Bruce, Graham, Amir have all said, bringing stakeholders together, common message, common theme to advocate for the state governments. So really, appreciate the M states, if you will, in their success here. So going back to, let's talk about the producer side now and how producers get involved and look at these opportunities at the state level. What makes a particular state attractive to a producer? How do they decide where to get active, which state to go and be present in? Amir and Graham, can you guys talk about your views on that and what you see going on?
Absolutely. I'll take a first shot at it. So usually it's the prevailing business environment, needless to say. And I think one thing that's very talked about less is the existing infrastructure and the existing relationships that play a role there. For example, Texas has no SAF tax credit, but because of the energy infrastructure that's prevalent here, you would see Houston's shipping channel as, one of the biggest import hubs for SAF feedstocks or even finished SAF. So the almost every pipeline, that services the East Coast or, Chicago originates from Houston. So there is that part. But I would also like to add on that usually, from what I've been seeing, is an airline's willingness to play in that space is really important. You need an airline sponsor who sits at the top and drives things It's not just the state and the producer that can get things done. The airline is equally important. And last but not the least, I would really, reiterate economic development organizations are a key part of it. Get them involved early on. And if you can create a story with local corporates, like it has been done in the Minnesota SAF Hub with Ecolab, with Excel Energy, that's awesome. Um, Even though book and claim can be global in nature, an airline in America can book and claim SAF credits from a flight flying between Hong Kong and Singapore. But there is something to be said about uplifting SAF at your home hub or wherever your operations are heavily based. So those are a few of the things that I've been seeing, and we can dive in deeper, Sean, if you have to, on any of these.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'll start with agreeing with everything Amir just said, and also thanking RMI. Jane Sadler, now at the Carb Chair's office, formerly at RMI, was kind enough to be a witness, and really appreciated RMI's support in that in the New Mexico rulemaking, where we actually had active testimony. And Sean, really appreciated your presence there and Airline for America's leadership on these issues. All the way back to the first work around getting into the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, which really was initiated by A4A and the airlines out there. The only thing I'd add, I guess, is maybe just a little more layering on what Amir said. It is very important, sort of all of the cost structure and how business friendly the state is, and then obviously the feedstock logistics issue is significant there, and no big surprise the state policy issue, because every time you're moving the fuel, you're incurring cost. And every time you're moving the feedstock, you're incurring cost and you're incurring carbon intensity on both of those things too. So to the extent you can do it all in one place, that's a great thing. Or if you can go across the state line, as folks sometimes do in places like California, I think with the New Mexico program, we'll probably see a good amount of fuel from Texas flowing in there, given some of the special aspects of that program that will be a draw. And certainly New Mexico, and I think every state that's established a clean fuel standard program, has wanted to pull industry in with more or less success, depending on those other factors.
Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about how the state policies in Washington State have attracted project development and investment in the state of Washington?
Sure. And I think that there's a mix of both feedstock price and availability that play a role in here, as well as state policy, because that you can do all you can for making the environment or the policy environment as positive as possible, but you also need those other ingredients to work. And I think for the two major producers that are either in production or have passed their environmental review and are in construction, those two production facilities from 12 and Sky Energy Americas, they have stated that the passing of our SAF bill 5447, which is a production incentive, was a major part of their decision making in going into Washington State, because that is a B&O tax credit that, depending again on your CI score, can be, I guess, smaller amounts of pennies to sort of 50, 60 cents a gallon incentive. And that's an important part of their decision making. I will say as well, we've worked with those producers to ensure that the way their feedstock is treated, if there is any book and claim, is recognized inside the Clean Fuel Standard, so that there isn't a penalty associated with using book and claim. And the other thing that we, of course, have as an advantage here in the Pacific Northwest is cheaper electricity. So if electricity is either your feedstock for electrolysis or just a major component for your production, there are these other pieces that layer into it that I think are a reason why, for example, 12, who is a power to liquids production pathway, found the Pacific Northwest attractive sort of from the first layer. And then these sorts of other incentives that we're doing at the state level are kind of add-on to their decision making.
So Stephanie, Amir, Graham, you each talked about different types of incentive programs. Can we sort of unpack that a little bit? What's different between an LCFS program and a SAF tax credit and the other types of incentives? Like Amir, you mentioned Texas. How those different things work, how they can work together. Let's dive into that a little bit. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll jump in on the clean fuel standard side first, because there's sort of a backbone to the clean fuel standard, which you have the carbon intensity analysis out there of the fuel, which is typically built around argon grete, and then whatever variations, so to speak, the state wants to layer onto those, or disagreements or additions. And some of those have been really critical. Of course, the CI reduction curve is really critical in terms of how hard is it driving the market, and how high does the market need to go to attract that low carbon fuel. And we've seen, just in the California program with the variability there, I think the prices have probably gotten as low as $40 a ton in recent years, and for quite some time we're up around 200 for a long time. So you can see how much that same program incentive was really variable, and CARB got really bogged down in that rulemaking, so they weren't able to ratchet that CI down fast enough. They now build in an auto accelerator. They did a 9% drop down and built in an auto accelerator component in this latest rulemaking to kind of solve for that problem. We see New Mexico coming in with a very aggressive CI reduction of 10% by 2030, 20% by 2040. So coming in really fast, and we haven't really seen how the market is coming together there yet. We also see New Mexico with the most flexible book and claim sourcing for process energy we've ever seen out there. So we've got the ability that we had in other programs to use renewable energy certificates, RECs, to represent the environmental attribute of zero CI power. And so that is a way to bring your process energy down for your facility. For e-fuels in particular, that's a game changer out there. If you don't have that book and claim flexibility, you're not going to be able to build wind and solar and only run on it next door. So all your fuel's going to Europe, right? Because you're not hitting that CI number. 45Z and European book and claim give you that flexibility, and so does New Mexico now. And then New Mexico put in a flat line benchmark standard for CI reduction. So unlike the other lines, because there is no mandate in aviation fuel to decarbonize, they flatline that. So the delta between that and renewable diesel is going to grow over time to 10% premium by 2030 and about 20% by 2040 relative to your gallon. So that is another place where we see those sort of nuts and bolts, the Clean Fuel Standard program really matter. And over to Amir.
Thank you so much, Graham. Graham knows everything that's there to know when it comes to deploying LCFS and new geographies. So thank you so much, Graham. When I zoom out into the global level, I see that there is a lot of activity happening with LCFS in multiple states. But increasingly, I've also seen a lot of state policymakers a little concerned with the fact that there's a public perception that the LCFS will push up prices on every road transport fuel up as well, which is not entirely false. And that is why, in general, state policymakers are sometimes averse to deploying LCFS, and they want to do something specific for SAF, and that is a direct SAF tax credit on the production side. Sometimes it takes the shape of an investment sort of tax credit, like we have seen in Colorado. And to be specific, I also want to call out states that have deployed incentives but aren't seeing the results. And that is probably because when you look at a 15 million or a 10 million sort of ITC compared to a 1 billion sort of bill that you get for creating a SAF plant, for building one from scratch, or even in sometimes converting one would cost you $1 billion, then that really doesn't move the needle. So the few things to be noted there, that sometimes the incentives are just not enough to move the needle. But apart from that, Illinois is one specific case where we have a SAF usage tax credit, which goes to the airline that uses SAF. So that's unique in America. And I think it's unique worldwide. So, we have a mix of LCFS, which affects the transportation fuel sort of fuel pool as a whole. If you want to directly incentivize SAF, you have direct SAF incentives on production or on investment. And then you have the Illinois style SAF usage tax credit. And then, you have permutations and combinations of some of these. These are the big four buckets that we see. Anything else, Stephanie, that you would want to add?
I think both of you have covered it very well. I want to respect the time that we have.
I just add that I think what you guys have expressed is that the different incentive mechanisms, tax credits, and LCFS programs try to motivate different behavior. Some of them are designed to incentivize the use of SAF. Some of them are designed to incentivize the production of SAF in that state. In the case of Kentucky, it's a little bit the production, but it's also, Graham, Bruce, you mentioned the ag interests of the state. Can you talk a little bit about how that played a role and affecting the structure of the incentive?
Yeah, sure. So, we we faced a bit of an uphill battle in that, Kentucky, they're doing a couple of things legislatively. They're phasing out their personal income tax, which creates a particularly difficult situation when you're trying to, secure an incentive. And they're looking for, they're not really supporting anything that's gonna impact potentially their revenues. So that was, one major challenge we had. We obviously ultimately it was a lot small. It was 20 million, capped at 20 million a year, 2 million per taxpayer. But I think interestingly enough, it was producer side, but there is also a component in there for ag, and 50 cents per gallon if that feedstock, for the actual producer of that feedstock. And I think that was a way to get the agricultural industry on board. And also phased in, if you were just blending, you could be eligible for $1.50, not to get into too many details, but we really tried to make the incentive broad enough that we could, bring in and get the support of the ag community. I think that was really important. And, we didn't, at one point in some earlier versions, since we started this, as you mentioned, Sean, back in 2020, at one point we had a package of, some traditional economic development type incentives for producers. That didn't get into this bill, but I think their EDC and the state as a full, has those tools available, and I think it's something based on the early indicators. I mean, this just passed in early April, but what I've seen and what I've heard from their agricultural department, their cabinet, and others, there's a lot of interest. We've heard from a lot of companies and have been involved in a couple of those interactions with companies that have an interest, producers that have an interest. So, I think you just have to be careful and also think about the broader. We're also coming off of the IRA credits. Kentucky got burned in a couple of ways, and the automotive side of the house was supporting some OEMs, and I think they're particularly cautious. And I think that's something that's not just unique to Kentucky. I think there are a lot of states that are kind of waiting to see how the dust settles and where they've been particularly supportive of manufacturing. So yeah, a little bit more there.
And just to follow up on something Amir said a little bit ago about, they don't, not all states have seen direct activity resulting from the implementation of these new legislative pieces. I think there's two factors there. One is it takes time, so for the market to respond, and two, from an airline side, from an airline purchase side, it needs to cross the threshold of affordability to the airline to be motivated to take advantage of that credit. So if it isn't margin of significant enough relative to other opportunities, it just may not happen at that point in time. So I want to pivot and talk about public-private partnerships. We talked a little bit about this as it's come along. They play a significant role in the offtake side. So maybe Amir, you can talk about that from a Sabo standpoint. Stephanie, I know corporates have been a significant player in the Pacific Northwest. You guys sort of talk about what you've seen on the public-private partnerships. Amir, how about you first?
Thank you so much, Sean. So I think the SAF-C industry has grown leaps and bounds from being almost non-existent around 2019 to now 7 years later. We consistently see, and the latest news has been one with American Airlines. So we consistently see these deals that Saba does, obviously, but also a lot of our corporates have now enough understanding to go out there and do deals alone, whether it's the hyperscalers, right? So you have the Googles and the Metas and the Netflixes of the world. You have another bunch, which is the financial institutions like JP Morgan, Bank of America. And then you have a third bucket, which is the Deloittes and the PwCs and the consulting and auditing firms of the world, followed by maybe a now emerging sort of pharma, I would say, semiconductor to some extent. So we are seeing a lot of these companies realizing that they need to get their scope 3 down to zero as well. And the biggest line item there happens to be air travel. And that is specifically scope 3 category 6. So we see a lot of these corporates trying to either approach Saba, get on board, do a few deals via Saba, and then go out there and do their own independent deals. One thing that's very important to know is that the SAFC market there's a huge opportunity in other parts of the world apart from North America and Europe. Asia Pacific is growing leaps and bounds, and so is LATAM. So we'll see a lot of demand coming from there. And that just speaks to, how not just Google Brazil or whether it's a hyperscalers arm in some other part of the world, but fresh new demand altogether coming from these regions, and we are really excited to see that private partnership shape up. The usual pricing is about $150 per ton of CO2 abated to about, I would say I've seen 500 as well, $500 per ton of CO2 abated for HEFA-SAF. So that's the willingness to pay that we see in the market. And even though, recent economic developments might have dampened it to a certain extent, but in the long run, we see it's in a growth phase.
And then Stephanie, Pacific Northwest, Cascadia, corporate role, public-private partnership, blah, 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 as we would say.
Yeah, and I really want to build on what Amir said about just, what has happened in the SAF-C landscape that is also sort of reflected at the micro level or the local level for us. And I would say that the public-private partnership was really part of even the infancy of the work that we've done here. There we had Boeing at the table, Alaska Airlines at the table, but then we also had the Port of Seattle, universities, other institutions, and so we really understand that because the ecosystem crosses all of those players, you inherently need public-private partnership for this to work. And so what we've also seen is that many of those corporations that Amir mentioned are also interested in what they can do at the local level, where their headquarters are located. For example, in Seattle, we have those same corporates who participate in those markets also saying, well, what else can we do to have, they still want that SAF locally. Book and claim, it works great, but there's also this sort of, well, what can we do to really invest in the economic development angle of this in our region? What can we do for, the air quality benefits, all of the things that are, also attached. There's additional value here that creates an interest in really building the supply chain locally. So I guess I see this as an extension of the original work, and that we have corporations and public-private entities that have been collaborating on this all along. And I think that kind of collaboration also has created the kind of policy recommendations where we have that consensus that when legislators see that both public and private entities are agreed on where to move next, it gives them a lot of confidence. So I think it's important throughout, whether it's policy recommendation or developing a project, it's critical to have that public-private connection.
Let's pivot to some of the Q&A things. I'm going to start marching our way through these. This is a pretty all-encompassing one. What are the key challenges in SAF scaling in the U.S.? Obviously, everybody who knows me knows I have an opinion on this one, but I'm going to bite my tongue. Amir, what do you think? What's your overall view of the key challenges in the U.S.?
I think the most important for me would be to be really frank, I think it's gonna be the willingness to pay. I think increasingly the pricing is something that we expected to come down a lot quicker, but when you have about 60 to 70% of your cost stack at feedstock, going into the feedstock sector, at least for heifer, then really, it's really hard to bring the prices down. So I think that's one of the key challenges when you look at the cost stack, literally everything is fine, but feedstock, if you're selling SAF for $7 a gallon and feedstock is about $4.5 a gallon equivalent, then I think that's the biggest challenge. We need to get the feedstock prices down by going big.
Yeah, and I agree. It's the price premium, it's the affordability to the airlines, and their ability to enter into those offtake agreements on an affordable scale. And so it's everything we talked about today is trying to address that. The state incentives combined with federal incentives and the corporate partnerships through the SAF certificates that the airlines do directly themselves with their customers, and SAPA facilitates for part of the market as well. Next question in the chat that we have queued up is, did the incentive programs also involve aspects like water footprint and water economic for the production of SAF? Graham, do you want to talk about that one?
Sure. Speaking primarily there to the clean fuel standard one, because I'd say the tax ones tend to, they may have a CI cutoff, but that's it. And carbon intensity typically really is the metric that folks are looking at in the state level programs at this point. We do see in the CARB program a phase in of some of the other sustainability metrics that you have in the EU and in CORSIA, with the first one being 2026 here, having some land use change provisions, and there's a new FAQ out from CARB regarding the specifics of that. That's going to sort of ratchet up in 2028. And then we are going to see potentially full-on international certifications across the board in 2031. Based on the latest amendments, but the phase in of that is not really clear. So the short answer is not yet. We don't really see those provisions. Switching over to the feedstock question here, we do see again the carbon intensity metric From my experience and exposure, I have a great deal of confidence in the bioeconomy and in the life cycle modeling. There are some folks who have much more dire views out there, but I think so. I think that's a good dynamic to be challenging that and being aware of land use change. But a very interesting development on the IMO front with FS pioneering a second crop corn feedstock that got approval as an ethanol fuel in the marine sector just recently within the IMO. So I don't think, given Brazil and the U.S. as big ag participants that are integrating sustainability into their ag programs, I don't think we're going to see the kind of bans on the EU, and I actually think we're seeing some revisiting of some of the bans within the EU right now as well. So that's just my perspective on it. But I'm hopeful that will be the case because I think there's great potential there, so long as those key sustainability guardrails are measured and remain intact.
Yeah, I agree with that, Graham. There is some movement in the EU on that has come through in a couple of different ways. The other thing I'd add is that, in the US, we're talking about a stack of incentive programs and contributions. And some of those do have sustainability requirements explicitly attached to them, such that virtually all of the SAF produced and delivered has a sustainability certification attached to it. And those sustainability certifications inherently include water use, food security, and other aspects of a full sustainability profile. So generally it's in there, even when as an individual state incentive program doesn't necessarily explicitly state it, though California does state explicit sustainability requirements for its
Right, and
LCFS programs.
Sean, you're saying there that's another component that the airlines and freight movers are integrating into their decision-making process, so it gets layered on that way.
Exactly. And so it's required for CORSIA, it's required for the California LCFS. Corporate buyers have their own. So net that essentially every procurement has a full breadth sustainability certification attached to it in one way or form, shape or form. Let's see. Next question in the chat. Do you see a particular group of investors that are backing emerging tech for SAF? Anyone? Well, I'll say I think it's a diverse set of investors. Breakthrough Energy Ventures has been an investor in various pathways. I don't think there's a particular group. I think it depends on the maturity of the pathway and the specific situation and the state of development. So you have one set of type of investors that will come in at the early stage, and then a different type of investor that will come in at the project development and deployment stage. So it's the supply of capital is available and out there for the right deals. Anybody else?
But I would add that they are all looking for stable policy, and so that is a reason why clean fuel standards are very popular, because those are longer term. And anywhere, I guess my advice for those SAF hubs that are out there looking for policy recommendations, we're certainly hearing from our producers and their investors that they need 10, better even 15 years of stable policy, because it takes so long to get a production facility online.
Next question in the chat. We've got about 5 minutes left in this webinar. Let's see how many we can get through. Going back to the SAF market and the voluntary credit market, can you please elaborate on how this support airport SAF hubs?
That's a great question. I think I'd like to take that. In general, whenever a SAF contract is signed, we call it BCU, book and claim units, or we call it SAF certificates, there's usually a place at the end where we designate the uplift station. And that uplift station can be IAH, can be LAX, and what that does can be SFO. What that does is essentially if you have the infrastructure readiness to handle SAF, then the first place where SAF starts flowing is, because of that specific contracting mechanism, that the uplift volumes are tagged onto your pipeline or your jet fuel infrastructure. And that basically is giving you additional flow of SAF that has been already paid for by a corporate. So basically, whoever the airline is, the big uplift, I would say the hub manager is just basically paying for that SAF to be flown in, to getting into your infrastructure for literally free, right? So you can put your SAF percentages up, like SFO, if it's running at 17% SAF, it can hit 3% extra if there's a contract that asks for it, and if SFO can handle that extra percentage of SAF in its tank. So it's basically a win-win situation where, you can pump in more SAF wherever its existing infrastructure is ready, and you can generate book and claim units off of that. So it's basically, the corporate gets sort of a PR story, right? That I flew out of Seattle, which is my basic operations hub, and Seattle Airport gets to have a shipment of SAF that was already paid for. So that's the way it works.
And if I could build on that as well, that where you have corporates who are very experienced in SAF-C and those book and claim, you do see them also say, well, there are other locations that are really critical to our operations where we think investment really makes sense, and they will play a part in those hubs because they're very interested in seeing production flow through those hubs. So they can use sort of their power and experience to help build out more than just, three airports where it's available. So that's another way that the SAF-C experience or the SAF-C interest can also help other airport hubs.
Okay, I think we have time for a brief answer to one more question. What role does a carbon tax play in driving more SAF usage? Graham?
Yeah,
I'll answer.
I'll give the short answer, not much. I think all of these other policies that we've talked about end up being much more important.
And say that, that it effectively becomes part of the value stack, and how it is relative to other choices you might make.
I
So
Yeah, Sean, on that note, there's one specific thing that, if you're modeling an internal carbon tax within a corporate, that really helps you pony up a lot of amount for paying up for your SAFC at the end of the year. So if you have a government carbon tax, that's different. But if you're trying to simulate that within your own company, internally as an internal carbon pricing mechanism, then that basically gets you a pot of money within the corporate that can go ahead and purchase SAFC for decarbonizing your own category 6 scope 3 travel emissions.
And it's important to note that there are jet fuel taxes in the United States. They're not labeled as carbon taxes, but they are jet fuel taxes. And so they are effectively a form of carbon tax, which some of the SAF tax incentives are offset against those things. So it's an incentive to rebate or avoid that jet fuel tax, for example. And that's kind of how the mechanics work. So I think we're out of time. I want to thank our panelists for joining us here in this discussion, and I want to thank Roz and the Sustainable Aviation Futures for hosting it. And Roz, I'm going to hand it back over to you to close everything out.